To really understand what child sexual abuse is, it can be helpful to understand consent and the law. Sexual consent is a free, informed, enthusiastic, and specific agreement between people. It is always reversible, which means someone can always change their mind about taking part in a sexual act, even if they agreed to the act earlier. Each state has slightly different laws around consent. In Victoria, there are affirmative consent laws. This means that the people taking part in a sexual activity must check that they have consent from each other. They need to make sure the other person is freely saying yes. That means that consent can never be given if someone feels forced, if someone is asleep or unconscious, if someone is affected by drugs or alcohol, or if someone doesn't understand what it is they're agreeing to. Understanding the laws around consent can seem confusing, especially because there are different rules for different ages. We'll break down the consent laws in Victoria according to age, but first, we're going to talk about power and control. Thinking about power and control can help us understand why the consent laws are in place. Consent needs to be given freely, and if one person has much more power and/or control over the other person, that means that it's much harder to say no. It's not consent if a person is intimidated or pressured, which can happen when one person has much more power and control, such as if they are older. Children under 12 years old cannot give consent. That means that even if a child under 12 says yes to a sexual act, another person cannot do anything sexual with them. That also means another person cannot do something sexual in front of them or show them something sexual. Any sexual activity that someone tries to do with a child is abuse. For young people aged 12 to 15, they can give consent if the person is not more than 24 months older than them. That means if, say, two 15-year-olds wanted to explore sexually together, it would not be a crime as long as both of them gave their consent. However, if a 15-and-a-half-year-old was interested in someone who had only just turned 13, they would not be able to get legal consent from the 13-year-old, even if the 13-year-old said they wanted to take part in something sexual. We can understand the reasons for this if we think about power and control. We could expect the older person to have a lot more power, especially when it comes to social status and emotional development, than the younger person. In Victoria, the age of consent is 16. That means if people 16 or older freely and enthusiastically give their consent, then it is not a crime for them to take part in sexual activity. However, if the sexual act is with a person who is caring for or supervising the 16 or 17-year-old, such as the young person's teacher or sports coach or doctor, then consent cannot be given. This is because the person who's caring for or supervising the young person would have power and control over the young person. Let's imagine a 16-year-old who's great at footy and has a 21-year-old footy coach. They might get along really well, and there might be sexual attraction between both of them. But if the 21-year-old made a move or wanted to do something the 16-year-old wasn't comfortable with, the 16-year-old might feel like they can't say no without there being consequences on the footy field. For example, they could get benched for the next game, or they could be pushed harder at training, or they could be ignored in training. Because of this imbalance of power, and because the older person has a responsibility over the 16-year-old, we can understand that legal consent cannot be given. Remember, consent always needs to be given when something sexual is happening. If consent isn't given, then it is against the law.